Okay, welcome. I just thought I'd go over these. I drew these. I'm not completely certain that they're like spot on, but it seems plausible enough that I thought I'd record. So in my last few videos, I've been kind of mentioning the concept that the storm was here and the basalt of the Deccan traps were, in essence, maybe the coming across Sarastra Peninsula from like this region and then accumulating here because I've been looking into the Gar National Forest. I just posted a bunch about it. No, I don't know. I did that this year. Sorry, pops. Fog 'em. Okay. So for a while, I've been suggesting that the storm stopped here. Maybe I can find previous things. So maybe one of these here, this one, especially this one. So I've been generally suggesting it came across this way from here. Here's the peninsula that we're looking at in Photoshop images. Came across here, and then I believe for some reason it might have like locked itself over here for a bit while it fed into the mantle, and then was pushed away this way through an opening that it carved and was able to get through this region. Like it required the terrain to be low enough for it to pass through it. So in order to do that, it literally carved an opening in the terrain and then it moved through it. It's kind of what I'm thinking over here occurred. And then it managed to get over past this like different material polygon. This block is different than this block is different than this block. So these are all different materials. It was up here between these blocks at the boundary of them, maybe trying to get between them and just like making its way between these two initially, but feeding energy into this one that just went down into the mantle until like pressure coming out from the mantle from the system bringing ethereal energy through it from the cosmos, from space into the earth down through this layer, especially through this polygon, then pushing the mantle out to a point where then there's an outflow from this hole, from the puncture hole, where the space was flowing into and carved a hole down through the moho, the boundary between the crust and mantle, so that the mantle could freely flow upward. and then and then the space itself went into the earth, causing a pressure upward. So then there's an inflow and an outflow. And when the outflow started to get substantial enough, I believe, basically it started to put a pressure ethereally, energetically on the storm that just physically caused it to move away out of like a bonded circumstance. Like it was bonded, but then it kind of rebounded away over here to like a new steady, almost like an electron jumping to an excited position in a different orbital shell, like it was over here orbitally around this thing along this polygonal boundary. And then it carved an actual physical opening through the intermediary polygon and moved over to the next polygon, to the excited energy state, maybe. And importantly, here, as opposed to up here, I believe has substantial basalt emissions from the Earth between the polygons here, especially because the storm just sits on this fracture hole and causes, for certain, causes a current down here to cause this chakra, the Shaligram chakras feature here. So there's a current that flows that spirals vortexes here, creating nodes. But in order for there to be a spiral, there needs to be an upwelling current as well. So it may have, like, especially emitted from here, I was wondering. I'm not sure. Or just over here. And also maybe there was some type of current, like, focusly coming out of this location to intersect with the current cutting across. And so then I was thinking, well, like, this region really wasn't, none of this was formed yet. So, like, we can kind of look at this as just like a blank polygon that's just like flat, relatively speaking. There's, in terms of like, when the Deccan traps basalt overlay flows atop whatever's there, it basically creates a flat layer of like the upper layer. So regardless of what the terrain was like there, unless it was very mountainous, which it doesn't seem to have been, it just didn't matter that the terrain was like that. So it just what really ended up being most significant was just the basalt, and it was seemingly the surface, at least, that was most shaped by currents from this storm. So my thoughts are, back to here, is this was generally just not formed in this. None of the geological features here were formed in the manner that they appear right now. And so it's generally a blank slate that a current flowed across and hit a boundary where it then accumulated at the boundary. And this is what I was thinking for Gur National Park, is this accumulated to a point where it builds a mound. So if you imagine there's a current coming in that's building a mound to a point where the mound pushes back on the current. So it begins to basically have a back pressure that, as the storm pushes the material across, the back pressure gets stronger and stronger. And so this region just fills up with enough pressure, I believe, that it begins to essentially have, like, fill this space with a barrier from the currents cutting across. So like these currents don't make it anymore, and it more so starts to go like this and just push out further, and then what cuts across begins to collide with it and deflect around it. So it's still coming across from this original position, but it's beginning to deflect. And so I think that once it starts to deflect, this is almost like vibrate. Now it's vibrating, like the storm is here. The exit point for the storm's energy is here, or here, down this way. But like it's because if we go back to here, the mantle puncture hole is here. It's kind of pushing this way and eastward generally, so that, like, when this pressure is coming downward here and there's a current going this way and a current going this way, the storm could move like to stabilize itself across from one of the outlets over here or over here. And so what I believe happened is the storm, like, this is not in an equilibrium, so the storm had to basically move to here, and so it did. Then the storm moves. And now we have the storm here, just sitting here at a new, like, node where it rapidly moved to, and then it sat there. And if we look, I noticed this might be a good time to pull up this map. I noticed right there, there's this deep depression, a low intensity anomaly of the magnetic field here, right where that, like, this generally. So I'm wondering if, because like it didn't just randomly stop here, and if we look around this region, I've mentioned this before, what it does is it carves actual like conduit channels in down through the and so like we see that in mass here, just along this boundary, because it's coming the energy across the surface, and then when it reaches this softer surface that it's actually able to penetrate down into, it then goes into the surface to the mantle, which it then punctures the moho and reaches the mantle in this polygon, not over here though, because the surface was not, like, it was too dense, and so it preferentially moves to regions energetically that it can just like sit there for a bit until it feeds what it can feed, and then resistance builds. So when it sits here, when it's up here and this mound doesn't exist, it can just push energy across, and there's not really a backflow yet, so it's able to just push a current, but then that current builds up. And so it just begins to have enough of a pressure where this location is no longer like energetically optimal, and so it just begins to vibrate into this position over here, seemingly by moving like its current that it's inducing. Like once the current is induced over here rather than this way, because the back pressure from Gur National Forest, from the mound of basalt over here, just pushing back, because it's still liquid, so it's like it wants to flow back to just be like a flat, stable, but it's building like an actual mound taller than over here because the current's just flowing across. Okay. So it moves there. We still have, I believe, we still have current generally coming from the top side. Like the storm is still inducing, maybe also just that there is basalt and it's generally moving into the Saurashtra Peninsula. Sorry, guys. Okay. But so while it was there, it seemingly did the same thing. Like if we look around, these type features, just the porosity in the region, maybe, I haven't looked. It looks like there's a little bit more like dark pockets, there's spots, which also occurred up here, it looks like, as well, but especially here. Like this is where it's most pronounced and just distinguishable, because over here it just didn't reach over here, like the wind swept across, but the energy that was really trying to flow to the moho and into the earth was able to over here, so it just stopped having that effect because the energy was not quite, it just diminished. Like it wasn't as close to the eye of the storm that I believe hung out in this location for the longest time, just feeding into the earth here, just like tapped in the earth, exchanging energy with the earth upwelling the mantle, and the storm inwelling space itself to cause it to bubble. And then the storm moves over there and reaches a point of saturation of the energy it can propagate, and just preferentially moves this way rather than this way. Because maybe it could have moved like right there, even like as opposed to that node, like that node, which maybe are somewhat equidistant. And like it's, I don't know. But so then it sits there, I believe. I believe it sits there a while, putting a current across this way, but there's still this mound of resistance. But because there's a current cutting across that's hitting the wall here, some of it's going out into the adjacent land masses as well as into the newly forming ocean bed. But it is also deflecting to the side, but because there's a general current cutting across here, it causes like a resistance in the same way as over here. It causes a resistance over here that pushes back against the current that's flowing across, so that they collide essentially, and that causes that current to spiral and to loop into Alec Hills, and in so doing produce Barda Hills in the process. And so this region becomes formed now, especially in this time. So while the storm is over here still, it hasn't discharged and like struck the earth, which will happen. Like Gurnar at this stage really is just basalt, I believe. Like it's really not it doesn't have maybe even any differentiation of the materials, where there's a whole array of different materials. It's probably much more like everything else is. But so I believe that like while this is occurring, like this is creating fault lines that are also fracture lines, like because this one and this one are crossing, and wherever the collisions are occurring, they basically produce downward upward energy flows that then start to carve into the earth and then just create generally fault lines as this process unfolds, that then allow for like underlying magma pressures to be released to come up through those openings to then create what we then see as fault lines in certain locations in this region. So like I believe this also kind of explains some of the fault lines. Let me see if I can find them behind all my filth. Like this one maybe is just the energy is coming in initially, building like the kind of like when a wave hits the shore and then starts to recede, and they have like a point of collision that's just like digs into the ground, the sand there, but does so energetically as to be a fault line. And just creating these faults, perhaps this one as well. Maybe this one looks pretty much like it's could be formed in like this kind of time frame, when there's a mound here and there's a current coming across, where this just kind of goes like that. And this one maybe is more initially, like here is maybe more like this. to be more like that one. To a point where maybe some of these are just explainable by the currents and the subtleties of it. Maybe even all of them are, that I'm just not gonna try to think through and casually just be like, at least some of them look like it. I mean, maybe some of the others don't. Whatever. But that this is leading, like, it makes sense that it would lead into this from just a standpoint of pressures and currents, and if there's like a wall naturally already present there for just because that's how it was, that then created a boundary for this to flow within, then it seems like this would make sense, and it would also come around this way and maybe begin to like this mound. I drew it very large because I think it initially was much more just like a mound. Like if you could just a mound, just increasingly taller towards the edge, and just, but then this current collided with the polygonal boundary and started to deflect around it, and basically caused vortices as well down through this region. Let's see. Gujarat images there was. Like this. Not only going around here, but also the current went up this way and into this region. So this spiral is actually off of the current that goes up around this way, I believe. But essentially, these start to occur and just open the space between the polygonal boundary and Gur National Park, so as to have that mound end up being like this rather than more like that, maybe. And currents coming across here then collide with the currents there, which at this location will begin to ripple outward. But like, this is just the end pattern. I recognize that like there's steps to reach there probably, so that's kind of what this is focused on, is that the Gurnard didn't exist yet. This is just a current coming across. None of these like plutonic complexes existed yet, as they're called. But then the current started to fill the region with basalt, which then started to flow more complexly, which then moved the storm over here and just filled this region again. So then the same thing occurs where the pressure this way is just filling this region. So it's no longer essentially, I mean, I'm wondering. I was just a thought. Like, is it bringing this basalt up and raining like hellfire practically? I don't think so. I think it's just flowing out of the earth and then distributing the current, like a wind distributing water. But it's just such an intense storm that it's distributing this emissions that are then flowing out here to a point where like it physically is pushing against the Deccan traps currents to move them over here, but they just continue to fill this region because they initially flowed down here and fill down here. Then over here they start to flow here, so they start to really like make this empty void spaces that weren't like quite getting enough pressure to the general region to just squeeze them shut to be like fully Deccan traps and not have these like openings where the current just hadn't quite reached yet, kind of regions that could have current reach. So it kept filling that, but then at some point it just filled it. So this whole region then became more. It probably is thicker, I would say. I'm pretty sure over here it is thicker. Like I'm like over a kilometer, whereas over here it's not as thick. I'm not completely certain what the map would look like, but I would strongly believe that it at least had some aspect of that going on. There may be more nuance, like around the polygonal boundaries and other things that I'm not thinking of right now, but so then essentially this region gets formed pretty well as the storm moves away. Like when it's up here, it's putting a current across that way, but maybe when it's over here, it's also like pushing current up into this from here, like up this way. I'm not just this way, but also up this way of the Deccan traps, so that when it moves away and the pressure is released, then the still liquid, viscous, low viscosity, the still fluid material can just flow away from the mounds that we're forming and just retreat back into the pressures of the region, but then they do so in a way where they create just these boundaries. Like this current is still putting like a sort of ripples this way, so that essentially it reaches further into the back pressures, so that the equilibrium ended up being more there. But over time, this region just generally fills with pressure, just as this did over here. But then when this is coming this way, I guess it's also kind of creating like a void space here, maybe, relatively speaking, because it's this current's coming back across some space for just things to funnel down to like a focal point, maybe, that also was related to fault lines that were forming by like this crossing with something else at some other point. I don't know. But so then the storm moves down again, and we still have the general current. So as it's moving, I didn't really draw this part. I believe it then is putting especially currents here to kind of contribute to the final shaping of this region as these currents are coming across. But all of this section that's not this encircled green, all of these currents are already like established, like the eye of the storm is past, so they're pretty much settling, whereas where the storm is, it's really still shaping it. So what then ends up occurring is it appears to then move down past like the resistance of this mound. Like it had a pressure that like pushed back, like back here, maybe to like here. So once the storm makes it past that like back pressure of the accumulation of basalt, that just the mound over here that just pushed backward, it gets past the like barrier point, and then it's like within the system's boundaries. So then it begins to rapidly move to like a position where it's able to just, for some reason, like discharge. It's trying to discharge into the earth through this process, essentially, to equilibrate, to become in an equilibrium. Equilibrate, is that a word? And so, like, because maybe this back current is opening a pocket here, it's almost like an an opposite node, like another terminal to have like a exchange between the two, anode cathode. Like this is kind of an anode relative to the cathode, maybe, but also an anode relative to the cathode overall of the Earth, maybe. In a way, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly why it was so excited. Like it really wanted to discharge there. It must have just been such a strong storm that it really needed to discharge. So once it passed this, then it was able to like through this opening discharge into the Earth, which then for some reason sparked like the rapid expansion of the Earth, which was 66 million years. This is really what caused the actual KPG boundary, was this storm discharging right here, this moment, and then across the Earth just like this. So like the current across the Earth at Chicxulub, when this occurred, when this discharge happened, the current then went around the Earth to the opposite side and just boom, caused like a simultaneous Chicxulub event, I believe. I'm not sure if it's exactly antipodal or if it is at all, and it's just more so that we're overstating Chicxulub's importance, and I'm kind of like accepting that overstatement and as it being like the cause of almost of the KPG boundary, because it's not, first of all, it's not an impact, it's a nova that formed under the Earth that broke a bond between polygonal boundaries, because these are essentially like atoms that are bonded to one another, and when the bonds break on Earth, they do so by along the coastlines a lot, which is a commonality in craters. It's not really at all recognized or accounted for that there are so many craters, significant ones too, found along the coastlines. All sorts of things. I talk about that in other places. Okay, so now, so then it discharges in this way. Here now, when it moves down to here, it suddenly discharges, pushes up this final boundary, and basically brings a channel into Gurnar to discharge its like final discharge into this vortex of Gurnar. And then while this is happening, like where these eddies are occurring, there's fractional crystallization occurring. Method of refining substances based on differences in solubility. It fractionates via differences in crystallization. It's causing a separation, centrifugal force type thing. It's compacting things that want to be compacted in vortices, in like a positive vortex. So it makes like Alec Hill's, let me see if I can find it. It's like this. Here's Alec Hill's from this paper, or it's mostly rhyolite in this central region, but with alluvium. These are deposits. A little bit of gabbro up here, which is interesting. Basalt, but then granophyre out at a ring of granophyre. This occurred because there's a vortex that was causing centrifugal forces and separating things. And also, maybe, although these ones I read have very little to no basement crossed relationship, the granifier here of Barda Hills and Alec Hills, so maybe there's not a relationship to the basement rock as there is in Mount Gurnar, and making it more just like a truly differentiation thing from just that there was a vortex, which makes it more likely that Mount Gurnar, which is also differentiated into basalt, so the surrounding basalt, this is just what was flowing in the region, basalt, that then, because of a vortex in the region, was itself a hexagon, but then within that hexagon is a hexagon of gabbro, olivine gabbro, and within that is a triangle-ish thing of diorite monzonite with a ring of granophyre slash micro granite, and then another ring of basalt within the olivine gabbro hexagon, because there was a vortex here that was essentially separating the basaltic flow into different materials to a point where it crystallized those materials out, so that there is not basalt in this region. There's no basalt here. There's basalt here in this ring, but there's not basalt here. There's no basalt here. I mean, maybe there's a little bit, but generally speaking, like this is what geologists, when studying these regions, are finding, is there's not basalt there because it was differentiated. It was separated somehow. How is the question? And it's because there was a vortex of energy physically flowing the basalt currents so as to differentiate it and crystallize certain materials at the center in certain shapes and ways and so on. But so, before I end this, two more things. These here. So back to this here. Not only is this storm sending a current here, so notably it kind of like mounds over here, like even though it's here and could reasonably maybe mound here as well, we don't really see like the Gur National Forest really extending. It seems to be a, like the storm is maybe like a certain width, and with outside of that, because I drew these arrows smaller, like the current across is not quite as strong, and so it's only able to produce like a most energetic current to a certain width that probably, like, the further it's able to go, the more that width opens up just by naturally. And so, not to set up what I'm going to say in a bit. But so, like, let me go back here. Gur National Forest is only this far over here. It really didn't compile it as much. So this shape I noticed. So if along the edge, it kind of takes the shape of the edge, maybe. Although I'm not sure if the other one does. And then is outward from it, and then has a somewhat flat, like, opposite side. I noticed all the way over here is a kind of triangular with a flat side and two kind of rounded other sides. Very much like similar in shape to this. So this is a 90-degree angle. I think on this scale that we're looking at, this is about 1,000 miles, a little less, On this scale, like the 90 degrees is not going to be accurate. Like it's going to wrap around a bit. So I believe that even though it doesn't necessarily have to be 90 degrees, I just think it was. It had, for some reason, it was focusing energy at this angle and at a 90-degree angle off of it. And maybe at 120 degree or 135. At 135-degree angle, off of the mantle puncture hole, generally speaking, it comes straight away from it, and then a 90-degree split off of it some reason. Maybe. It's kind of what I'm thinking is going on. And then it bends across the surface. I'm not sure, so I started looking into this. I don't know anything about this location. I don't even know what it's called. I did find something that is already... Oh my god, this freaking mouse. But if the storm was here, and this mantle puncture hole was sending energy down this way, and then splitting it off down this way, across here, down under the ground, under the terrain under the crust. And then it hit the polygonal boundary similar to this. It hit a boundary of the crust. And it started to compile a mound underground over here. So maybe what's occurring over here is not actually Deccan traps on the surface, but it's still caused by the current underground just uplifting the region. Because this, unlike over here, really resembles the actual underlying magnetic anomaly map. Like this, there's no this. Oh, there's nothing like that here. Like, where is that? Nothing. But this looks a lot like this. Let's look around a bit. Even this region as a whole, this region looks a lot like this. So I would say that's probably what happened. So is that while it was here, the current from the mantle puncture hole over here that essentially reached the storm was then caused not on top of the surface but underground to physically flow under India and just create this region. And then it moved again, so it moves over here and then down here especially. But over here I didn't make one because I didn't see it. Probably just kind of, if this is occurring, it just kind of shifts. It begins to shift. This straightens. And this one, when it discharges into Gurnar, appears to be in line with like all this stuff protruding out here. Like just straight across here, create just, let's see on the map. So it discharges into Gurnar, but it also is sending an energy the opposite way, which then is shaping the terrain over here. That then starts to like fan out and just like splatter into this long like distribution of this. But this region may be all happening under the terrain, because if we look at Deccan traps, they really don't reach the boundary. Like not loading the image cleanly. I feel like sometimes I'm just like researching and recording a video, and I'm just like, is there some major thing I'm stumbling on right now? Like, this seems to explain a lot. So here's a good one for the Deccan traps. A really Proterozoic Archeon. So this is all old, which is why I'm saying like I don't believe that it was in any way overlaid with Deccan traps, but it was influenced by the currents of this storm in general, propagating underground from the mantle puncture hole. For some reason, one portion goes up onto the surface and goes in this direction, the other portion stays under the ground and goes in that direction, and that then feeds into pushing up this entire region to be as it is today. But it's not Deccan traps, whereas over here, when this discharge happens, it physically brings the Deccan trap material onto the surface, across the surface. So there's portions coming from this way across here that also go down along this region. So if we go back here, like they reach along here while the storm is here, but they're not over here in this region, because the storm is directing it southward generally along that way specifically at that stage, which is also reaching over here to fill this region, it seems. But then the storm moves from up there down to Gurnar, where it discharges suddenly across, which is where this like outstretched segment it comes from, I would say. Which then, as the current continues to flow here, there's just pressure, so then it essentially has an opening. It flows into this region. As it's just discharging, it fills this region with as well. I would say that is true. major progress. I didn't think, like, for sure that this was gonna lead me to something I'd feel confident about when I started, but it's really, I believe this is pretty strong possibility. Cool. I just don't know what to share with people to like start sharing it. My research, it's just so much. I'm like, I can't expect anyone to look at any at all, and then I can't really expect anyone to look at any of it because I know they're gonna reject just a little bit. It's like people have to choose to look at my research, and that's a tricky situation when I'm pretty much an asshole all the time. Fuck you guys. We're all one. Fuck you, other me. Then another life after my stupid mistakes finally catch up on me and I realize that I have much to learn still. No, I'm not learning in this life, bitch. Yep, that's life, motherfucker. Maybe. But I do think it discharge, like, if we look at this especially, this is crazy. It's so straight. Look at this. What river in the world looks like this? Show me another river that looks like that. What in the... It's just too straight and long. And even when it turns abruptly. Ain't no river in the world like that, but if there was a lightning strike this direction kind of thing that had a opposing energetic discharge in the opposite direction, I mean, it's quite likely that it would produce a long, straight, just penetrating energy that don't give no fucks. It's like a honey badger, don't give no fucks. It goes right through. And then it starts to hit some resistance where it then bends enough to look more like typically would look. But over here, nothing natural that we certainly know of, at least. Maybe this storm is natural. But so I'll stop here. Thanks for watching. Cool. Also, just a quick thought. Like, while the Deccan traps are forming, while this energy is going this way, this probably closely ties to the Réunion hotspot, meaning the Deccan traps are not caused by the Réunion hotspot. The Deccan traps are caused by the mantle being punctured and releasing mantle in the proximity, and also that there was a vortex storm over top of the region, and that combination is really what caused the Deccan traps. But it also caused the Réunion hotspot. Also caused. It wasn't that the Réunion hotspot was the cause of the Deccan traps, because it wasn't. It also caused the Réunion hotspot. That's probably what the energy that like got past here generally like retreated into the earth in some fracture hole, or it could just like slide down and form some kind of like node that's still hot and molten relative to the surroundings, and then that region just moved to be where Réunion is now. And then we were like, that must have caused the Deccan traps, but it didn't because it was caused by this. I see you guys.